Rare footage.
Daigo actually angry. Justin's turtle style. Overcome Rao. Now on the verge of putting Daigo down 1-0.
This is the most iconic moment in competitive video game history. It's known as Evo Moment 37, or simply the Daigo parry. Countless videos and articles have already been made dissecting what exactly made this moment as incredible as it is, so I won't cover all the details, but here's the basic rundown. The match was between Justin Wong and Daigo Umehara, who were generally considered to be the best players from America and Japan respectively. They were facing off in Street Fighter III Third Strike at Evo 2004, the biggest fighting game tournament around. Such an event was already front-loaded with hype, of course. Back then, it wasn't as easy to play against opponents from overseas. This was a match that people have been talking about for a long time, and it's finally coming to fruition, at Evo no less. The match was incredibly close. Daigo was on the ropes, only a pixel of health left. Justin had his super art ready to go, a 17-hit combo that rushes towards the opponent. In Third Strike, you still take a little bit of damage when you block attacks, meaning that even if Daigo were to block, he would still lose the match. His only option was to parry, which is to push the control stick towards the opponent at the precise moment when an attack lands on his character. This has to be within a 10-frame window. 1 frame of animation is equal to 1/60th of a second, so that's a window of 1/6 of a second. And Daigo has to parry 15 hits to survive. Obviously, it seemed basically impossible for Daigo to win. Yet, he pulled it off, and we're still talking about it decades later. It's easy to be amazed by Daigo's ability as the player that made history, and rightfully so. But have you ever stopped to wonder, what does it take to design the game where legendary moments are even possible? It's a daunting question to ask. How do you design a legendary moment? Is that even possible to know? Well, perhaps by looking at what Street Fighter III did, we can figure out how this legendary moment can exist. Of course, there are many reasons why a video game moment could be considered legendary, from glitches and exploits to clever fourth wall breaks. But when it comes to player versus player competition, there really isn't a better case study than the Daigo parry. It's a story of fierce rivalry, masterclass skill, and overcoming insurmountable odds. But that story could only happen because of the game's systems that allowed it. It's impressive that Daigo could parry 15 hits in a row, with only a 1/6 of a second window each. But if Third Strike didn't have a 15-hit super art and a 1/6 of a second parry, this moment couldn't have existed. Think of a game's systems as existing on a scale from soft to sharp. Soft games are more lenient with risk, timing, and required skill, while sharp games are strict and more difficult to master. What if Daigo only needed to parry 3 hits? What if the timing was a generous, say, half a second? This would be a much softer game, and the Daigo parry wouldn't have been nearly as impressive because the skill needed is significantly less. At that point, a perfect parry would probably have been seen before many times already. We can actually see this in later Street Fighter games that have similar parry systems with much less strict timing. Anyone can pull it off. That's not necessarily worse game design, but a legendary moment it does not make. So, does that mean that the opposite is true? What if the game was much sharper? Daigo needed to parry 30 hits, and he only had 1/15th of a second window each. Of course, that would have been significantly more impressive, but does it reach a point of diminishing returns? We already have a legendary moment that's been covered by headlines, books, podcasts, and of course YouTube videos. If the moment was more legendary, would that have actually changed the impact of the moment? Of course, we can't really know the answer to that question, but it's important to note because there is an inherent risk in designing games to be this sharp. If the game was that strict, would Daigo have been able to pull it off in the first place? The chance of him making a mistake is way higher, and if he did, Evo Moment 37 wouldn't have even existed. We can look at this more broadly. If the game was too sharp, would it even have gotten popular enough to be noticed, let alone mastered? At what point is the game considered more of a novelty, not taken seriously as a competitive game? Similarly, if the game was too soft, would it have enough tension and depth to be taken seriously? This is all conjecture, of course, but it's clear that there are boundaries, and some of these boundaries come down to raw numbers. For example, we know how fast is too fast for the average human to react to. This topic is covered in depth in an article from Infill's wonderful Killer Instinct Guide. The article states that the average human reaction time is roughly 265 milliseconds, or about 16 frames. You can actually test your own reaction time on this cool website called Human Benchmark, which Infill's guide refers to. My reaction time is about average. As designers, we can use this knowledge as a benchmark for our games. Generally speaking, anything faster than 16 frames could be considered non-reactable by the average player. So if you need to design a reactable attack animation for one of your characters, you should probably make sure it takes at least 16 frames to start. This is a clear numerical boundary. But do such boundaries exist for other gameplay details? How many hits should be in Chun-Li's super art? How strict should parry timing be? Should blocking avoid all damage or just most of it? The truth is, it's ultimately subjective. It depends on the experience you are trying to create, and as a result, games appeal to different players for different reasons. Street Fighter III is a case of doing what it meant to do really, really well, and is still remembered as a classic and important game to this day. Contrast it with something like, I don't know, Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which was a remarkably soft game for several reasons, such as random elements and a slower pace. Brawl did not have a terribly warm reception as far as the competitive scene goes, especially in comparison to its predecessor, Super Smash Bros. Melee, which still has an active tournament scene to this day. But it would definitely be wrong to say that it wasn't a success or that it didn't achieve what it was trying to do. Either way, Brawl did not capture the depth of strategy and player expression that a competitively viable game needs to thrive long term. That's a goal that it just can't meet because of its design. It's a game designer's job to design what kind of experience a game will be. If you're a game designer, you have to decide where the line is for your game. There are no right and wrong answers in abstract, but thankfully, games do not exist in abstract. There are only right and wrong answers relative to your intended experience. Finding the sweet spot between soft and sharp is often the same thing as finding the sweet spot between accessible and engaging. But that's not to say that they are mutually exclusive. Rather than thinking, how accessible is my game, try to think, how is my game accessible? Instead of thinking, how engaging is my game, try thinking, how is my game engaging? When you know what your game is trying to achieve, then you have guidance on how you can maximize accessibility and engagement. That means you can make the best version of your game and open it up to as many people as possible. Once we understand what makes for a strong design, we can finally answer the question, how can you design a legendary moment? Part of the answer is in the name. Legendary moments are legendary for a reason. They are the exception, not the rule. If the Daigo parry was something you saw in most matches, which would only happen in a softer design, it wouldn't be a standout event. Legendary moments only exist in contrast to normal moments, meaning there needs to be room for rare moments to happen. Third Strike made room for a legendary moment by giving players options to create tough situations for their opponent and giving players options to get out of tough situations and allowing players to get really good at using those options. Remember, if the game gives you too much room, the odds of success are higher. Legendary moments only exist within slim odds. Justin had a solid lead in health, positioning, and resources, but the game still gave Daigo the option to get out of that if he played really, really well. The parry system requires some measure of skill to utilize, but it's not too hard to get 1 or 2 parries in a typical match, but the room exists to get much, much better at using them, to the point that a player can literally make history. That is depth. When a game is designed to reward players for getting better and better at playing it, it makes for a deeper and deeper experience. During those rare moments that we get to see what the peak of potential skill looks like, it's a shocking, inspiring event. So if your game can encourage players to fall in love with it enough to keep pushing it to its limits, maybe someday one of your players will find one of those limits, or even surpass what we think those limits are, just like Daigo did in 2004. Once that happens, people can't help but take notice. They'll struggle to wrap their minds around it, and they have to share it with others. That's what we do with Legends. I really appreciate you watching this video, and of course, I really appreciate you hitting like and subscribing to the channel. I plan on uploading a lot more videos about game design. This is something I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and I'm stoked to finally put something out there. I hope you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I love you all, and God bless.